hello. It has been some time. Honestly, you do a little bit of a few videos together, and what do? They send you to Elba. Huh. But you know what? Joke's on them. They needed something quick. Guess who has quick things? Ha! So I'm back. I'm back. I have returned. So, what are we doing today? Well, today we have something that is actually very, very late in the Georgian period. It's from 1827. So it's very, very late in the Georgian period. It's right at the end of George IV's reign. So we're kind of pushing it there. And this is one where we're doing this one because I want to do another one that's actually more famous, but we start out with this. That is Thomas de Quincey's On Murder Considered as One of the Fine Arts. Now, there are 3 essays about this, but we're only looking at the first one, which fits our period. The later ones are published later, so we're not looking at those. So I will mention about them a little bit. But it's Thomas de Quincey about murder. Actually, this whole book is all about murder. Mostly they are pieces from Blackwood's magazine. But before we get any deeper, before we start, if you want to support this channel, remember there is our shop where we have books and other writing services. There is also our Redbubble shop where there are over 100 designs. So you can support us that way. Otherwise, if you want to support us but you don't want to spend any money, which is completely understandable, like, subscribe, comment and share. Really love when people leave us comments. So that's really great. We do try to answer, or like everyone. If people need an answer, we will answer. Otherwise, we like them. So that's I always enjoy seeing them. Okay, so On Murder as considered one of the fine arts. Now, the reason why I wanted to look at the first essay and not the later essays is because the first essay still has the qualities of 18th century satire. Unfortunately, the editor of Blackwood's magazine felt a need to put a qualifier in underneath the introduction and the essay saying, "This is satire." And I was like, yes, we could tell, sweetheart. We could tell. And I think that probably signposts a little bit where the 19th century is going. So this notion that, we have to signpost things. We have to be very obvious about things, which actually is part of the reason why I find 19th century writing, Victorian writing in particular, really dull. Just not particularly interesting. Because what makes the 18th century satirists great is nobody's signposting them. Nobody is saying, you've not got Gulliver's Travel saying, "Hey, I'm satirizing a whole bunch of things. This is satire." It just sits where it is. Nobody looks at A Modest Proposal and goes, "Nobody's actually advocating the eating of children." It's like, yeah, we know Mr. Swift is not, or Dr. Swift is not advocating the eating of children. We're not stupid. But 19th century loses that edge. There is an assumption that the reader is stupid. There is an assumption that the reader needs moralizing too, that the reader needs educating. It's really patronizing and I don't like it. So that's why we're not doing the latter ones, because the latter ones do start to do that I'm being satirical. Really? You don't say. I know small children don't get sarcasm, but we're all grown-ups here. We can get it. So that is an objection that I have to the later essays and why we're not looking at those. But the first essay is it is satirizing the, the influx of societies for the betterment of people, which all very well and good. But if there are societies for the betterment of people, there are obviously going to be societies for the worsening of people. Because in the opening, he talks about, we've all heard of the Society for the Promotion of Vice, of the Hellfire Club. Now, there are multiple Hellfire Clubs, but the most famous of which that people think of is the one that Byron was a part of in the late 18th, early 19th century. And a society was formed for the suppression of virtue. So the other two are actually, flipping on their head the fact that these societies are starting to come to the fore. These are not really societies that were existing. These are coming out of the abolitionist movement. They're coming out of the idea that maybe we do something to help others, accepting that these are coming in a very patronizing manner. They are infantilizing the people that they are assisting. To the extent that people really didn't like having to get the assistance that was offered by these benevolent societies. It wasn't really great, because the assistance that was offered was generally the assumption that the poor are not as fully human as we are. This is a world where, coming into the First World War, the officers who had to censor the men's letters were very surprised that the men cared about their wives, their children, their mothers, their brothers, sisters, fathers, as much as they did. There really was a gap. So these societies are starting to come up in the 19th century, and this is satirizing those as, we have these other societies that are promoting vice, because vice obviously needs promotion. And this society is a murder club where people discuss the aesthetic qualities of murder. Now, this is coming off the back of a murder where 7 people were killed in 1811 in 2 separate murders very close together. And the notion of the murder society is that this is a really thrilling example of murder. This is murder done well. Not all murder. The essay goes through historical murders. Now, not all murders are considered worthy of their aesthetics. Most are just nasty little murders. Nasty little things that happen that have no aesthetic qualities, no panache, no nothing. And they're boring. Even Caesar is not rendered a great murder. In fact, he thinks very little of the Romans. The Romans are just pretty straightforward murder. It's political, it's power, it's boring compared to some of these other murders that he has. He believes a philosopher is not worth his salt if somebody hasn't tried to kill him, which probably means that you haven't annoyed enough people, that somebody hasn't attempted to kill you yet. But ultimately, it is this idea that a murder, to be aesthetic, has to be fascinating. We have to be interested not only in the nature of the murder, but also why this happened. The murder victim is, sadly, and this does rather continue through, because this is an interesting element of this. This continues through to the modern day. The murder victim is generally not that important. Or why the person was chosen is not always that important. What's more important is the actual act. And now the society is very aware that in the immediate aftermath of a murder, it is in very bad taste to, discuss these things. So these things are always a bit removed. 1811 is the most recent murder in the essay, which is separated by this and the publication of the essay by about 16 years in 1827. It is a murder of enough notoriety that it is still current and can be used 16 years later. So the point is that, yes, once everything is all settled down, judicial execution and punishment and whatnot has been obtained, the person mourned, all of that, then you can look at the aesthetics of it. And really, he's tapping into something that we have always been fascinated by. But the difference is that one of the things that this period that he's writing in allows for is that people are not being just fascinated by fictional murders, or historical murders, they're being fascinated by contemporary things, true crime. This is the beginning of true crime. And the later essays really lean into the true crime. They're much more detailed. People are fascinated. Why? Because they are in newspapers. People are actually hearing about these things. What sells newspapers? Murder sells newspapers. Scandal sells newspapers. These things will sell. So these things come to the fore. They still sell. If it bleeds, it leads is a thing that is said about the media. This is what people are fascinated by. I mean, in my country, and it wasn't just my country, it was around the world, people spent months following the mushroom murderer last year. They were fascinated by this woman who managed to off several of her in-laws at a dinner. Nobody in my country is making beef Wellington ever again for company, or possibly ever again. That's off the menu, and now beef Wellington has become shorthand for murder. And it was because it was fascinating. It was fascinating, and De Quincey is right. Sadly, while it's terrible that 3 people lost their lives in that, why someone did such a thing is fascinating. It's not them who are the fascinating ones. It's the murderer who is the fascinating one. And that stands true to the fact that murder is integral to narrative fiction. Because this really is coming back. That's why we are talking about the aesthetics of this. The aesthetics of this in narrative fiction. If you take murder out of narrative fiction, you're going to lose all of Dostoevsky. You're going to lose sizable chunks of Dickens. You are going to lose big swathes of Shakespeare. No Murder, no Hamlet, no Othello, no Lear, no Romeo and Juliet, no Richard III. No murder, no Macbeth. And yet, when you look at these stories, the person who's murdered is generally the least interesting. Duncan is barely a character in Macbeth. Hamlet's father is killed off stage before the play. We never meet him. We see the after effects of the murder, which is fascinating. We see the murderer on the throne, and we see Hamlet attempting to suss out, has he actually killed his father, or is he actually going mad? No murder, no Lear. No sisters tearing each other to pieces. No murder, no Othello. Which is not one of my favourites. No murder, no Richard III, who kills his way to the top. And none of those characters are particularly interesting. When you watch Richard III, what do you like? You like Richard and you like Buckingham. The others get some good speeches. Clarence gets a really good speech. But most of the others that he kills are, Buckingham is the character you want to, after Richard, the character you want to follow. Most of the others, or Margaret. Queen Margaret is an interesting one. She doesn't end up dead. But usually the murder victims in these stories are somewhat dispensable. Now, it's a very different story if the point of the story is the person being murdered rather than the person murdering. That shifts it. That does shift it. But the same question arises around aesthetics. How is this done? Why is this done? How do you invoke pathos or comedy if the purpose is the murder victim? And that's where you would get something like Othello, where both the murderer and the murder victim are the interesting ones. You would see that also in Romeo and Juliet, where with Mercutio and Tybalt. They're both interesting characters, and one killing the other and then being killed themselves is a major driver of the plot. It's where this entire play, it's the murder in the middle of Romeo and Juliet that turns it from a sex comedy into a tragedy. Because up till that moment, it could all be pulled out of the fire. It could all come good. It could be, some way could be made to resolve this, but the minute blood is spilt, that story changes course and you see it. It's that moment like in Jaws where it turns into an adventure film and then becomes boring. But anyway, because the fun in that film was the murders. The murders, the shark killing people was the fun bit. And then it's like, oh, okay, I'm kind of less bored now. I'm kind of bored now until the very end of it. But murder changes the tone. And there's so many. Certain things are like, with all the stuff around Wuthering Heights, you'd assume there's got to be a murder in there, but there isn't. They're just vile to each other. So it has no catharsis. And that's what murder also offers. It offers us a form of catharsis because it is part of a tragedy. I mean, you go all the way back to Oedipus Rex. Oedipus Rex happens because there is a prophecy that this child will murder his father, and to avoid being murdered, he goes and Laius sets in place all the things that will get him murdered. Because by abandoning his son is brought up somewhere else, hears the prophecy, doesn't want to kill his father because he loves his father, or the man he thinks is his father, meets Laius on the road, kills Laius, prophecy comes true. Ends badly for everybody. But it's a major driver in that play. And it's a major, if you put murder in something, it becomes a major driver. Or it becomes a the thing that it is working towards, because you can use it that way. But it has to be, there is an aesthetic quality to it. De Quincey is right. It is not a moral quality. He separates out the moral quality and the aesthetic quality. The moral quality is you don't go around killing people. It's horrible. You don't do that. There should be absolutely punishment for this. And De Quincey never in his essay advocates for murderers getting away with it. What he is advocating is the aesthetic qualities of it. And the aesthetic quality, he is talking about real life murders, which is why it's satirical. But the aesthetic qualities of murder are something that we do consider in books. And we consider them very much so in books. Because once you put it in, it changes the book. It can make a comedy into a tragedy. It can make a comedy into a very black comedy. It can, The Goat. The Buster Keaton short film, The Goat, has the idea that the Buster character thinks he's killed the man who harassed the lady with the dog, who's the daughter of the chief commissioner. Because and that is why he thinks his photo is there on a wanted poster, not because there was a screw up at the beginning of the film where the criminal didn't get his mugshot taken, but Buster got his through the bars of the window. And and this is why he thinks he's on the run. Everyone is afraid of him because they think he's a murderer. He's not a murderer, but even he is, through seeing this, doubts, oh my goodness, did I kill that man? Of course he didn't kill the man. It becomes very darkly funny because of that. We tell stories about things that frighten us. And death is one of those things that frightens us, and more so than any other kind, the idea that somebody would kill us is what really frightens us. An accident is unavoidable. Illness is unavoidable. These things are going to happen. You sort of accept that accident or illness is likely to happen. The idea, however, that a person would deliberately, maliciously, and for their own reason want to deprive you of life is one of those things that is frightening. It's why we are fascinated by them, why we spend so much time. Now, De Quincey is at the very beginning of true crime, but how many true crime things have you watched? I can certainly say I've watched far too many, and more than I really probably should, and you can go down a rabbit hole and it's very dark, and there's only so many. You start to get to the point where it's like, okay, I just watched how many episodes about Jeffrey Dahmer? I need to stop. And I don't mean fiction, I mean actual true crime stuff. I think one summer I watched a documentary about Jeffrey Dahmer, a documentary about Son of Sam, and then another one about the Yorkshire Ripper and the Night Stalker. And then I thought, oh, I've had enough now. I need to stop because this is getting really dark. But it's fascinating because I'd heard all these names but hadn't really known what they were. I mean, sure, I could have looked them up on Wikipedia, but actually watching, multi-part documentary was kind of more interesting. We are fascinated by murder. Sadly, we are not fascinated by murder victims. So, and that is where our fascination with murder hits that ethical impasse. Because it is one thing to be fascinated with fiction. Fiction is perfectly legitimate. It's when it starts to cross over into true crime that we start to become members of the murder club, where we start to think, have I crossed a line? Have I crossed a line where I am looking at what is a heinous act as entertainment? Am I looking at this as an aesthetic thing? Am I forgetting that what is behind this are innocent people who have been killed, and have been killed horribly, have been alone and frightened and at the mercy of somebody who is truly, truly evil? And that is where the pure, like, taking something and making it purely satirical rather than starting to overlay morality into it, gives it its power. Because purely satirical things make you pause, and they make you think, oh, this isn't actually a very nice thing to be doing. This is not good for me or for whatever, anyone. But it's certainly not good for me. And so I can maybe think, maybe I want to amend that. Maybe I want to change that. You know, if we think about, well, you may as well have Irish people eat babies, sell babies for food, rather than, I don't know, alleviate some of the poverty that is deliberately caused in the country to enable people to be able to live with a level of decency. You don't need to say that out loud when you read A Modest Proposal. You don't need to say out loud when you read the first essay. Perhaps a morbid fascination with real life murder is lessening you as a person. And that's why I think the later essays are actually less. They have more sensation in them. They do have more sensation in them. They have more detail in them. However, they are also much more moralizing, and it's in the moralizing the message gets lost. And they are much easier to read as just sensation. So I prefer the more spiky satire that you get out of the earlier period, because it is more powerful. It's not pointing you in a particular direction. And I think that's where the Victorians really fall down, is that they start pointing you in a particular direction and it raises your hackles. You're like, don't tell me what to think. Whereas when you take something that just makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, then it's, oh, yeah, that's going to work. That is actually going to work. And so, yeah. But that is Thomas de Quincey's On Murder as a Fine Art. So we will be doing the Confessions of an English Opium Eater, because Opium Eater is actually earlier than this. It's 1821, so it is within our period. It's in the latter part of our period. So that's why I wanted to bring you a little De Quincey, so we can do the big De Quincey. Again, I don't do a lot of romantics. I do have a German romantic that I will be bringing. But we have a few other things. We are going to go backwards a bit. I found some really old stuff, and there's, like, by really old stuff, I mean 16th, 17th century. And they're not English, they're Spanish and German. So as nobody else can really do that stuff, we will have a look at that. One is about the 30 Years' War, which we will, I've got a couple of, we've got a couple of books that are all on the 30 Years' War, and we're going to do them all at the same time. So I think it will be myself and Her Infernal Majesty, and I think Janice is the other one, because we've got one that I'm doing, Mother Courage, and Janice has a contemporary book, a German book that's set during that period. So we'll do those at some point. As I said, I found this Spanish book, which is finally off back order, that's a very early narrative novel. So, and as Janice has been doing a lot of South American writers, we've found that picking up the odd Spanish writer is actually quite useful. So we're sort of expanding our way into Spain. We're more interested in doing a lot more European stuff than North American, and much more South American than North American. So if you're wondering why we haven't done a lot of that, that's why. Just, it's not really our frame of reference, especially. But there will be a lot more interesting things. I will be back more often now that I've returned from Elba and my exile. And we have a lot of interesting things to bring you this year. I know we're a little way into it, but we do have a lot of interesting things to bring you. And anyway, so that is all I have for you today. And so, farewell. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.